So in short, Nick, you're saying Indian policy is military policy. I know this is like an assertion you make throughout your work, but I think reading this report and then being in the archives, it's abundantly clear that that is the case through and through, right? And I mean, if it wasn't mentioned already, um, Indian affairs were in the Department of War, which later became the Department of Defense, and now we're the Department of the Interior with plant and animals. um, but I wanted to, I mean, so the way this report opens up is very compelling. It opens up by talking about the capture of Geronimo, and it talks about how, um, as a result of the attack on Geronimo and the capture of Geronimo, a lot of Chiricahua Apache children were taken, and Chiricahua Apache children alone represent 1/4 of all the graves at the Carlisle Industrial School. So I wanted to actually just read from that quote directly. It says, in 1886, the Apache Wars ended when Chiricahua Apache leader Geronimo and his band surrendered to the United States. Critical for westward expansion, the U.S. Senate passed the following resolution thereafter. Resolved that the Secretary of War be directed to communicate to the Senate all dispatches of General Miles referring to the surrender of Geronimo and all instructions given to and correspondence with General Miles in reference to the same. Although neither Geronimo nor others in his band were charged or tried for crimes under U.S. courts, President Cleveland ordered for Geronimo and his band to be removed from present day Arizona and held captive indefinitely in Florida as U.S. prisoners of war. Under U.S. military control, surviving Apache children were forcibly removed from their families and shipped by train to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania. Some children were later returned to their families as confinement of the Chiricahua Apache Band extended across U.S. military installations, demonstrating that all Indians, including Indian children, hold a distinct political status in the United States. Some Apache children never returned, compromising 1/4 of Carlisle grave sites. So I had never heard that before, and I thought that was a very compelling way to start this report. And I was, pleasantly surprised at the way they included that Native children hold a distinct political status in the United States because they do. Native people in general, but I think Native children specifically, they represent the future of Native people. They represent quite literally our future. And so I think, they're very aware of that. There's a reason that child removal is a genocidal tactic. Um, so I also wanted to speak to Secretary Holland's push to do this project. I mean, just from the Pueblo perspective, it's very, very profound that she took this very heavy project up. I mean, I think as Secretary of the Interior, it's her responsibility, but also dealing with death can be a very taboo topic culturally, especially for women. And she demonstrated, I think, bravery, but also like just this dedication to her people and to all Native people by taking this up. And I really like, I pray for her and I think about, perhaps maybe some of the repercussions that she could be getting for this. And I think it sets a precedent for how we as Pueblo people need to move forward, talking about death, talking about the way that we've been implicated in the boarding school system, and being more actively involved in these conversations in the broader sense. Um, so yeah, this is the report is here. The report kind of just lays out like how data was collected, and it's interesting because me and Nick are like looking at BIA archives, and it doesn't explicitly name those, which I think is like pretty relevant because already in this short time we're already finding a lot of pretty relevant stuff. Um, it goes on to describe the boarding school framework, how it works, what the goals were, and then it talks about the conditions, which is probably the hardest part to read. Um, it kind of lists them out by school, talks about boarding schools in Alaska Native villages, in Hawaiian communities, and then schools for the freedmen, which I am so happy they included because the freedmen are always left out of these conversations. Um, and then I also really like how it included um, talking about respect to NAGPRA, but also to various tribes and how they receive remains, or maybe they don't, and how sensitive information really needs to be kept private. Like, because Nick said, there's also precedent for grave robbing, but there's also a multitude of reasons that tribes might not be able to receive remains, or how the intake process needs to be handled with a lot of care and a lot of specificity based on tribes. So I'm really glad it doesn't include too much of that. Um, and then, of course, it talks about the legacy impact, which I think I have some critiques of how that conversation could play out, but we'll save that for the end.